Let's continue from that. Now, how do we check whether our results are valid? First, we have to look whether they are valid, then are they important, is valid, how important they are, and are they applicable to our practice. So for the validity, that's very similar actually also in the other study designs. But for the harm studies, we have to look, did the investigators demonstrate similarity in all known determinants of outcome? We have to ask also, did they adjust for all differences in their analysis? Let us discuss it on behalf of one concrete example. What kind of study do you see here? Here I have the link of the study, long-term adverse effects of paracetamol. So obviously, this study is investigating the harm of giving a paracetamol to people for long times. What kind of study is this? If you look to this figure, to this flow diagram, you should be able to differentiate and tell what kind of study it is. Is it a randomized controlled study? Is it a cohort study? A case control study? Or a meta-analysis? Yes, it is a meta-analysis. How do we understand it as meta-analysis? We look what they did. They searched for publications. They searched for citations, for published reports, evidences. They found using some keywords, and they found 1,400 plus. And from them, they reviewed title and abstracts of some articles, and at the end, they included in their study 120 texts, full texts of scientific publications, which they analyze at the end. I will tell you more about this study, also about the findings, but at this moment, I want to discuss with you the validity. Is it valid? So validity, for validity, we look to where in an article, in a publication, to the methods section. In the methods section, we need also to find out whether there are possible confounders in the study, in the research, and did the researchers take care of or control for the confounders. What were the confounders? A confounder is called a variable that is related with the cause and effect. So this is the outcome here in this slide is myocardial infarction, and we are checking whether high cholesterol is leading to myocardial infarction. If you have this kind of question and you didn't control for age, you didn't take care of age, you are not able to claim that high cholesterol is causing myocardial infarction, because the MI can be due to age instead of high cholesterol. So the people, the participants with high cholesterol and low cholesterol should have comparatively similar ages, mean ages. Otherwise, it is not possible to do this comparison. Somehow, this age here in this case is a confounder, and you must take care of the confounders. What else? For RCTs, randomized controlled studies, the randomization process helps us balance groups by both known and unknown risk factors. It is easy for RCTs before the study, before starting to do the study, before conducting the study, you are able to select your groups, and the treatment group, the treatment arm, and the control arm. You can decide they have a certain age limits, so they will be similar age groups, similar sexes, similar whatever. So you are able to control for the confounders before you initiate the study. Therefore, RCTs remain a powerful design for harm studies. The problem is that RCTs are very often not feasible to study risk. So, because this is RCTs are conducted usually in a small number of participants, not in large scales participants. What about cohort studies? In cohort studies, they need to measure known potential confounders very carefully. And since you are not able to decide what kind of confounders are in this present in the participants, you do this after you collect your data. You take care or you adjust for the confounders statistically during the analysis stages. Similarly, also for case control studies, either you match at the beginning the cases and controls on behalf of the confounding variables, like they have the cases and controls have similar age groups or similar sexes. But still here, you can adjust. During the analysis, you can control for the confounders. Were exposed patients equally likely to be identified in the two groups? That is a critical question we have to ask when we appraise a study on harm, where the patients, participants, equal the possibility of the participants to be in one of the groups, was it equal for all participants? So here, if you have conducted a case control study, there is the recall bias, for example. If you ask a mother who had a baby with birth defects, whether she consumed alcohol during the pregnancy, a mother with a baby who had the birth defect will probably remember more the one glass of wine compared to the control group who had healthy babies. So the recall bias is very important. There are other types of bias which you already should have mastered, but let me remind you about them. For example, the selection bias, where the baseline characteristics similar, or allocation bias, were the participants allocated to the control and study groups or the different arms of the study with equal chances, without bias. Then we had the performance bias, adherence to the therapy. Did they take the medication or adhere to whatever suggestion the protocol has foreseen equally in the two groups? Then the detection bias, doing the measurements, applying psychometric measurements or bodily laboratory measurements, how and who did the measurements? If the researcher was doing it, and if he is not blinded for the study and control patients, that can be a possible for bias. Because if I know that this is a treatment arm patient and I'm measuring the body mass index, it is possible that I cheat. That is the fact. The scientists, although they claim and they want to be honest, always that's not 100% possible. So we have to take care of this blinding whenever possible. Attrition bias, you also know, at the end of the study, some participants in some arms will be missing. They will not apply. They will not show up for the control measurements, and they will withdraw. This we call the withdrawal. They withdraw themselves from the study. So what to do with those who have withdrawn themselves and who did not show up, who were lost at follow-up. And lastly, the publication bias, because most of the papers you read in the medical literature have some positive findings. Those who have negative findings, who could not show a significant difference between the groups, they have, unfortunately, no newsworthiness. Like in the media, you know, if a news appears in the media, it needs to be worthy to be published. A similar story applies also to scientific work, unfortunately. So, another question is, were the outcomes measured in the same way in the groups being compared? For RCTs and cohort studies, patients in the exposure group might be followed more closely. That is called surveillance bias. If you have two groups, one is the study group, they have to come regularly to take the medication or receive the intervention. You see them more frequently. Simply because you see them more frequently, that could lead to some differences in the study and control groups. What else? Look for clear description of outcome assessment. Blinded groups treated equally in all ways. Was this achieved? What else? Was follow-up sufficiently complete? This we mean the attrition also. If the exposed and non-exposed groups are not followed equally, bias may be exposed. And especially if those who are lost to follow-up differ from those who did not. We, of course, we accept at the beginning that those who were lost to follow-up and who are there, they have similar baseline characteristics, they have similar demographic features, but this is not always the case. So whenever possible, we should also look whether in the paper the researchers, the authors could prove that those who lost the follow-up, who did not adhere to the medication, who decided not to join the study, were they similar from the demographic characteristics side, were they similar with those who were analyzed. An example for that, a cohort study examines the association of coffee with upper GI bleeding. So the conclusion is coffee is protective. Coffee is protective. Actually, clinically, we know that coffee is a risk factor for gastrointestinal bleeding. However, then it comes out that in the coffee exposed group, a large number of participants were lost to follow-up because they were also heavy drinkers. And the heavy drinkers also consume a lot of coffee, and because of the drinking behavior, they forgot to return for follow-up. So the truth actually was that coffee was not protective, but because of this difference in the loss of follow-up, you could have interpreted it false. Here, that's the intention to treat analysis. You remember that, don't you? If you have a person who did not show up to the control examination, or who did not administer the given medication, given treatment modality, then there are three options. Either you do not analyze him because you don't know his last measurement, or you regard him as he was not exposed to the risk factor or the medication, or you keep him in the group where he is. And the suggestion was, in the intention to treat, to keep him in the group where he is. So if what is the, you could ask yourself, and it is of course good to ask yourself, what is an acceptable loss to follow up? We have, especially in large scale studies where we have a follow-up time, a long follow-up time, we have a lot of losses during the follow-up. What is the acceptable number? As a rule of thumb, a loss of less than 5% is regarded as okay, with little bias. And above 20%, we regard it as a threat to validity. So what is in between? In between, you decide what to do, looking on some other factors. But even if you have less than 20%, it can cause a problem. So considering a worst case scenario can help determine whether loss to follow-up poses a potential threat to validity. Let me show you another example related with this loss at follow-up. If you have, in this example, you have two participants exposed to the risk group and one non-exposed. In this case, out of 100 participants, in this case, the relative risk is 2. But if one out of these 2 people was lost at the follow-up, you could not measure him, and you would not include him in your analysis. That would be 1 over 100, 99, sorry. 1 over 100, because at the end you have 99 participants, and 1 out of 99 in the exposed group, and 1 out of 99 in the non-exposed group. So that would give you a relative risk of 1. And that's very important. How we interpret the relative risk, that means the risk is 2. If it is 2, it means 2 times more risk in one group compared to the other. But here, the risk is 1. There is no difference between the groups. So this is a serious issue we have to consider when we read, when we appraise publications on harm.